This video lecture covers Lesson 10 in Clayton Croy's A Primer to Biblical Greek. In this lesson, we will provide an overview of the different tenses in Greek. We will focus on the imperfect tense, and then we will discuss the imperfect form of the verb eimi. So to begin with a review of the Greek verb tense. Remember that the Greek verb tense denotes both time, past, present, and future, but also aspect or kind. So an action can be complete or incomplete, and so forth. You will recognize this chart from an earlier lecture that attempts to reproduce those two different types of, or those two categories of tense, both time and aspect. So on the furthest left column, you see aspect, imperfective, aoristic, perfective. And in the columns, or in the row on top, you see the different times, so past, present, and future. And you see examples in English of, for example, a past imperfective action. So remember that imperfective action is a reference to process or duration. It's ongoing, it's continuous. Perfective is the state or condition that results from a completed action. And aoristic is simply a reference to the verbal idea as a whole, without comment on the process or the results. This is the normal or unmarked aspect in Greek. So far, this should be a review from one of our very first lectures on the Greek verb. So to provide an overview of the type of verb tenses that we will see in Greek, here is another chart. Please note that there are 6 tenses in Biblical Greek, and that these can be basically broken up into 2 broad categories, primary and secondary. And so you can see, first of all, that primary tenses refer to the present, future, and perfect tense, and that these types of verbs happen either in the present or in the future time, and that they may employ all 3 of the aspects, imperfective, aoristic, perfective, and that the markers of the primary verb tenses are primarily shown through the endings. The secondary tenses, on the other hand, refer to the aorist, the imperfect, and the pluperfect. These refer to actions in past time, but they also can have a variety of aspects. They can be imperfective, aoristic, or perfective. And they are typically marked by a prefix, something that comes before the verb, and something that comes after, like an ending, or other markers within the verb. Now we are going to learn our first new Greek verb tense. And this is the imperfect active indicative. And it's worth noting that the imperfect tense occurs only in the indicative mood, so we don't have to learn other moods for the imperfect. And so this is with our common word now that we've gotten used to seeing luo. And so the first singular is eluon, I was lucine. Elues, you singular were lucine. Elue or eluen, he, she, or it was lucine. Eluomen, we were lucine. Eluate, you all were lucine. Eluon, they were lucine. And you'll see that with the personal endings, there are some things that we've become familiar with the present active indicative forms. For example, the sigma in the second singular, the men in the first plural, and the te in the second plural. Please also note that eluon is identical for both the first singular and the third plural. Only the context will tell us which form is intended. Finally, there is no distinctive ending for the third singular, but you might look for that epsilon or an omicron, which are those theme vowels which aren't used consistently enough to count as endings. So what is the imperfect tense? Well, as some of my translations have just indicated, it denotes imperfective or continuous action in the past time. So as an example, we could look at the Greek word ago, which means I lead or I am leading. I am leading is a present progressive or present continuous action. In the past, in the imperfect tense, agon would be translated as I was leading. Again, this would be our only action because the imperfective or continuous nature of the imperfect tense suggests that we have to have that I was leading. It was a continuous action in the past. So that's the basic idea of the imperfect tense. We may add some nuance to that in future lessons, but that's good enough for now. So there is this thing in Greek called the augment, and you've already seen the augment in the imperfect active indicative chart that we saw 2 slides ago. Essentially, an augment is an epsilon that has been added to the beginning of words to mark a past time or a secondary tense verb. So we always use an epsilon when the beginning of the verb is a consonant. When the beginning of the verb is not a consonant, however, there's some changes that happen. Essentially, when you add an augment to the beginning of a word that starts with a vowel, that original vowel lengthens. So for example, alpha would become eta, epsilon would also become eta, and omicron would become omega. This is true as well if the vowel starts with a diphthong. And in this case, the first of those 2 vowels in the diphthong would be lengthened. So I would become an eta with an iota subscript under it. You would become an eta with a upsilon. And then with compound verbs, verbs that have a preposition before the verb, the augment is added between the preposition and the verb stem. So all of this information about the augment is important for 2 reasons. One, it occurs with other tenses, so we're going to need to get familiar with it now with the imperfect. But in addition, the important thing to say is that you don't need to memorize these rules, you just need to begin to recognize them. And so you're going to have clues, other clues with the verbs. You're going to have your vocabulary that you've memorized. And then knowing that the epsilon in front of the verb stem indicates that you are in the secondary tense. And if you see a word that looks a lot like a vocabulary word that you recognize that starts with a vowel or a diphthong, but it looks slightly different, you would be good to guess that you're in the imperfect or another secondary tense. All right, the final chart or slide that I want to show you today in this lecture is for the imperfect indicative of eimi. Remember, eimi is the verb of being. Eimi means I am. And so the imperfect form is simply the progressive action in the past of I was. So amen means I was. Ace means you were. Ain means he, she, or it was. Amen means we were. Ate means you all were. And asan means they were. So once again, we see some of our endings that we have become familiar with, the sigma in the second singular, the men in the first plural, the te in the second plural. And as I mentioned, you see the lengthening of that diphthong, epsilon iota, to become a long eta at the beginning of each of those forms. And so what I would recommend is that these forms should be memorized. They're going to occur enough in Greek that you're going to want to be able to memorize them, to see them like you would see other vocabulary words. All right, let's get started with one of the practice and review exercises. This is number 2 from the practice and review exercises for lesson 10, and I chose this one because it's got a little more meat on it, and it'll be a good first example. So, houtas ha anthropas apathnesken huper tu adelphou autou, kai ididaske tan laan peri agapes. So, with this one, the first thing that I would plan on doing is I would start by bracketing off the prepositions. And so I have 2 prepositions, huper tu adelphou autou and peri agapes. After I've done that, then I would like to find the verbs. And so I've underlined those two verbs as apathnesken and edidaske. And the first of these is from apathnesko. Now, if you know your vocabulary, you remember that the form you memorized has an omega after the pi, so apathnesko. So that this apathnesken, that epsilon there, indicates the secondary tense, or in this case, the imperfect tense. And the new ending here is simply because the next word starts with a vowel. It's a movable new. And so I would parse this as imperfect, active, indicative, third singular. And I would be confident in parsing it in that way because I know that the subject is hutas ha anthropos. Ha anthropos is clearly a nominative singular, and so I'm looking for a verb that is also in the third person singular. The next verb is ididaske, and again we see that the augment there before didask, which is the stem, the verb stem from didasko, which means I teach. And so again, there is no definite ending for edidaske, but in this case we would be encouraged to see a third singular again. In this case, maybe it's the reference to hutas ha anthropos, and it's continuing into this second part of the sentence. But we would parse it as imperfect, active, indicative, third singular. And the subject is he, she, or it. It's implied by the verb form. And so a simple sentence would be, this person was dying and he was teaching the crowd. If I wanted to translate the sentence as a whole, taking into account those prepositional phrases, a translation would look something like this. This person was dying on behalf of his brother, and he was teaching the crowd about love. So just a few notes. Remember that huper plus the genitive means in behalf of or on behalf of, and so tu adelphou is in the genitive case because it follows that preposition huper. And autu is in the genitive because it is modifying adelphou. It's telling us which brother, and it's here the personal pronoun autas, so of him or his brother, a genitive of possession. And then peri agapes, again, peri plus the genitive means about or concerning. And so agapes is in the genitive case simply because it follows peri. All right, that is the end of the lecture on Lesson 10 from Clayton Croy's Primer to Biblical Greek. Now, I imagine that this is going to be a lesson that you may need to watch again because we sort of have introduced a lot of newer concepts in the sense of primary and secondary tenses, a new verb chart for the imperfect tense, and then also new verb forms of eimi. We will have plenty of time to work through these in the exercises, so in addition to reading the lesson carefully from Croy and watching this video, I encourage you to spend a good amount of time with those practice and review exercises. Thank you.